Good morning, everyone. For those of you visiting, I am not the full-time preacher here. They went way down in the depths of the bench to get me today. In the spring of 1999, a young college-age woman was hired at a local gym. As part of that new hire onboarding process, she was assigned to shadow one of the veteran trainers who was very well respected. He was very confident, did not lack in confidence, I can assure you, about himself and the job that he was there to do. At first, it was strictly professional. They only discussed the duties of the job, the protocols and processes, best practices of the job of a personal trainer. But quickly, didn't take long, they hit it off. They became friendly, including conversations about things like favorite foods and movies and music and things like that. Eventually, though, the banter turned a little awkward. With that familiarity, he came to find out that she was a Christian, and that would explain why he never saw her at work on Sundays or on Wednesday nights. And so when he asked her about this, she was very clear about it and said, yeah, I don't work on those days. It's very clear with the scheduling that I'm not here those times. And even outside of the gym, they started to see each other more often in a non-professional capacity. And she never changed her plans to accommodate missing church. He became annoyed that she was practicing her faith and I began finding opportunities to question her beliefs. And not only would I question, but eventually that questioning turned into scoffing. And I scoffed at her faithful adherence, and I even scoffed at the fact that where would the Bible even come from? What was this all about? Why would you believe in this stuff? And I look back at that and think about she was in a really awkward situation. This was a new job with a well-established person at her job. I wouldn't call me her boss, but pretty much I could have been considered her boss to some degree. And she knew that if she was going to witness to me, be externally focused, things could get messy. But I still tell this story, obviously, to this day. Rather than turning her back on the situation, Jenny chose to be externally focused, welcoming my questions, willingly offering evidence to support her claims, and even, what I really appreciate, gently mentoring me and teaching me about the gospel of Jesus Christ. I realize that it's hard to speak up, especially even offer correction to someone who needs it. After all, if we turn to Matthew chapter 7, please do so if you are able to. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 3. It is hard to speak up. It's hard to be bold, especially when we have scripture that says, be careful. Why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, and look, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. The story of my wife witnessing, where are we? This one? There we go. The story of my wife witnessing very patiently to me 27 years ago highlights the power and the obligation that we have to identify when others need help, even if they don't know it. Keep in mind that help can look different, though, in different situations. I learned very early in my marriage that there's a difference in helping, whether it's just listening versus advice. I learned that one quickly through lots of awkward and uncomfortable conversations. But just by listening, I was offering help. I know the brains of men right now are short-circuiting, but I must fix things. But regardless of what the help looks like, the approach needs to be well received. If you take a look at these passages in Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Going back to the story, she chose to live by the Spirit, willingly accepting this opportunity to witness to me. And I made the comment that she was willing to teach and to welcome those questions, but she did it gently. I'm still working on that. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, verse 10, "For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone, when he falls and has not another to lift him up." That, to me, is very scary when I look at how I lead my life. Am I recognizing that there are people around me who need my help? Do they need restoration? Do they need encouragement? Maybe it's just listen, maybe it's advice. You may not realize what's going on with them, but God does. And maybe it starts with just hearing your petitions on their behalf, even if you're not completely aware of what's happening. I like visuals. Now, there are many examples, of course, of people of faith getting messy on personal levels. People reaching out to those who are destitute, people who are desperate, and leading them by teaching them the word. And noticing a person in need and trusting that the Holy Spirit is going to give you the right answers in how to approach that need, it's still getting messy. But we need to find those messy opportunities and embrace them. Now, it may be a personal interaction for you. It may be something that's going on at your school. Maybe it's something at work. Maybe it's a relationship even at home or in your neighborhood. These three examples I'm going to talk about right now are examples of when it was going to get messy, but on a much bigger scale. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the particular patterns that you're going to see with these three examples. And then we're going to discuss a little bit more about how we can help to embrace these patterns, but also be on the right side of helping. First, let's start with a very, of course, famous story about Esther. And interestingly, in the book of Esther, I actually, as much as I've studied this book, I remember for years and years ago, Jenny and I did middle school Bible classes, and we did the story of Esther, and I was new to the Bible. I was new to all this stuff, so my first introduction was Veggie Tales. So helpful. But the more I study the book, and we focus, obviously it's named after Esther. She was amazing. But I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it as the story of Mordecai, her cousin. Mordecai noticed a dire situation. He recognized that his people, they were on the verge of being eradicated by this particular advisor from King Xerxes, Haman, who had this plan. He hated the Israelites. And he hated he hated Mordecai. And so Mordecai identified there was an emergency situation. But his hands were kind of tied. But then in evaluating, he recognized, but Esther, who has been placed in a very weird situation of being brought up in King Xerxes' kingdom, basically, as the queen, she might be the perfect person to go and approach King Xerxes to try to foil this planned genocide that Haman has. So why do I see this as like such a human story? Well, first of all, I kind of look at it and go, yeah, Mordecai's like, you got to do this. And Esther was like, I don't know. The humanity I can relate to with Esther's response is very, very personal to me. Look at her from her perspective. if she approaches the king unannounced without the invitation and he doesn't approve of her, she's dead. But let's say that he does approve and does not lower the scepter, or, not lower the scepter, and she is okay to go ahead and try to convince him of this situation and try to plead on her behalf and really on her people's behalf. She is then at that moment admitting, I'm one of the Israelites. She had a lot at stake. But it was Mordecai who had to be courageous to say, you're the one. He had to also have what we call in the self-defense world situational awareness. He had to realize that he had a role. Esther's role is to be sort of the tip of the spear, if you will. But that wasn't going to happen unless Mordecai stepped in and encouraged her to get messy. We need to have people in our lives who are willing to encourage us, because maybe we don't see it. And maybe we're like Esther, we're a little hesitant. We think the stakes are too big. But all of us need a Mordecai. Because when we are hesitant, when we are in doubt, we start to wonder whether the power of the Holy Spirit is going to work within us to bear fruit, which is what we are called to do. Then we may need someone to remind us that perhaps you are in that exact situation, as it says in Esther 4:14, for such a time as this. Next one. Well, of course we know about David. David who battled Goliath. But one thing to consider is, I think about, David was so fervent. He was ready. He had no hesitation whatsoever. But did you know he had very little support for what he was willing to do? So David would go out to the battlefields. His father would be like, hey, do me a favor, please go and take some supplies to your brothers who are fighting in the army. And it was interesting because his brother, one of his brothers who was there, was so irritated by him because of his response to Goliath's attacks and verbal warnings and basically calling out that army, the Israelite army. But it was interesting because David, again, we're looking for a pattern here. David went out there with supplies, and he was noticing this 9'9" behemoth calling out these Israelites, saying, come on, who's going to come fight me? Talking about, hey, if you beat me, we will serve you. If I beat you, then you will serve us. So, of course, everyone was cowering. And David, first thing he did, he didn't go, all right, I'm in. If you read that account, he's asking questions of the soldiers. Wait, what's going on? And he heard Goliath one day call out this challenge. And he's like, what? And he kept asking, now what's going on? He kept inquiring. He kept trying to understand and learn the situation. Until finally he was like, oh, now I get it. It's on. And so his brother was like, you shouldn't even be here. You just wanted to watch the war. And then it comes out that King Saul then heard about David saying, oh yeah, I'm going to take him on. So his brother wasn't even supportive of him taking on this responsibility. King Saul wasn't supportive at first, and he was supportive after that-ish. Because he says, yeah, you don't know. This guy has been training to be a soldier his whole life. So when David said, it's okay. It's so interesting here. Because I think about David's response to the challenge. And so David even asked those other soldiers, well, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? He was so mad. Do you recognize in our world, in your world, maybe a local world, maybe a little bigger, when your faith is being challenged, but more importantly, your faith is being defiled? And are we just not paying attention? David was not going to let that go. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Are you that fired up? Am I that fired up? When I hear people saying what they do about followers of Christ? When David actually finally told Saul, he said, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Don't worry about it. Your servant will go and fight him." And King Saul, who obviously was deathly afraid of Goliath, he said, "Look, these stakes are really high. I don't think this is a good idea," he said to David, "but I'm going to go ahead and let you have my armor. I'm going to let you use my weapon." So David tried it on. It wasn't going to work. David saw the emergency situation. He then realized he had to be the one to do something. But then when someone proposed the tools to take care of it, he said, "No, I know what tools God has given me." Think about this pattern. Spoiler alert, David killed Goliath. And then finally, I remember, now growing up, I remember seeing depictions. When I say depictions, I mean like pictures. And they were oftentimes all over my house or in places I went to with my family of Jesus. And knowing how much I know about Jesus now, I look at those pictures and I'm a little bothered. I'm like, he's basically just a woman. I love women. That sounded weird. But he was just soft, just smooth. And he was kind of depicted as this kind of meek, like gentle, always gentle. He's not going to get upset. It's love. I'm sure you can look at this particular picture and realize what that's representing. When Jesus saw that there was exploitation going on in his Father's temple, when those money changers were using this as an economic opportunity for them and not the purpose, which is to offer sacrifices, taking advantage of the people going in to offer sacrifices. Do we get that upset? That we look in these situations? Are we willing to flip over tables? Because people are defiling our faith? Obviously, Jesus took responsibility. He identified the situation, and he knew doing this in the temple, in front of all these people, disrupting commerce, was going to get messy. And it wasn't just going to get messy for him, it was going to get messy for all those who followed him. So I'm going to ask a question then. It's easy for us to look at Esther and David and Jesus and go, "Oh, well, yeah, if I'm in that situation, looking back now, Monday morning quarterback, I totally would have done that. I would have done that." It's easy to do that. The problem that we run into, though, folks, is that we are in a situation, we are battling the spirit against the flesh because our flesh doesn't want to get involved. In fact, there's some pretty cool research about that. In the 1970s, this is one particular example of a model that was developed about why people, as bystanders, don't get involved. So, first of all, there's a five-stage process here. At the beginning, in order for a person to even consider getting involved, the bystander has to realize that there is some sort of emergent event. There has to be an emergency, thus justifying some sort of involvement. Then they need to identify it as an actual emergency. Do they recognize that this is important? Something needs to happen. Then that bystander goes to the next step and says, "You know what? I need to consider, am I responsible for stepping in? Does this have to fall upon me?" Then, what's the best way to offer that assistance? What's the best way to handle this particular event? You seeing this similar pattern that we saw with Mordecai and Esther and with David and with Jesus? But it starts with recognizing that that event is an emergency. Now, of course, we can apply this particular situation to interpersonal things, also bigger scales, as we just talked about. So what are some of the underlying issues? Why is this occurring? Why do we have issues with people not providing help? Well, there are three major concepts behind this. One is called the diffusion of responsibility. Turns out, the larger the group that you're in, the less likely anyone's going to help. There's a scene in the movie Ghostbusters where Lewis, the accountant, is being chased by some demon dog, and he's running away from the dog, and he's outside of a restaurant with huge glass windows, and he's banging. Nick knows exactly what the scene I'm talking about. He's banging on the window going, "Help me, please!" And all of the restaurant customers are just sitting there watching him, and then they just go back to eating. It's kind of a funny little laugh. It's a good joke, but actually, it's a real thing. The larger the group, the less likely anyone is going to do anything. It's called diffusion of responsibility. And the idea is, it's likely you in that group go, somebody's going to handle it. Someone will take care of it. Another reason for inaction is what's called the evaluation apprehension. This means if I step in, I'm afraid people are going to judge me for that. Maybe they're going to look at me like differently if I actually step in and try to intervene in this situation. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to lose face. Maybe I'm not going to go about it in the right way. They don't want people to think poorly of them. Basically, it paralyzes them. And then the third one would be what's called pluralistic ignorance. We tend to, when we see a situation, we tend to go, "Oh," and then look around. How is everyone else responding? We wait to see what everybody else is doing. How many of you have ever been in a classroom setting where a person says, "All right, any questions?" And then you go, "Oh, I have so many questions," but you look around to see if anyone raises their hand. And if no one raises their hand, you don't raise your hand. Because you figure everybody's got it. When in reality, they're all doing the same thing. Some of you in this auditorium are way too young to know this, but I think it's a part of our American history that we cannot forget. American Airlines Flight 11, the passengers and crews outnumbered the terrorists that only were armed with box cutters. They outnumbered the terrorists 87-5. United Airlines Flight 175, the passengers and crew outnumbered the terrorists, armed only with box cutters, 65-5. American Airlines Flight 77, passengers and crew outnumbered the terrorists, again, only armed with a box cutter, 64-5. Only United Airlines Flight 93, whose passengers outnumbered the terrorists 44-4, showed any evidence that they fought back. Thus, the plane landed in an empty field. If you take the total, that's 246 crew and passengers against 19. If you were to tell me I have those odds, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm good." But yet, why do the outcomes not reflect what should have been a different response? Now, I do want to be clear, it's not an indictment on those passengers and the crew. But it's instead to highlight what we fall victim to, which is the issue of being a bystander. Each person on those flights noticed the event, but they interpreted the event differently. They then also did not assume any responsibility for handling that event, and maybe even questioned, what tools would I have to be able to overcome this situation? I like science. It's cool, since it's kind of my thing. So I'm just going to list off some interesting things about bystander studies. In 1968, there was a smoke-filled room experiment. 75% of participants who were in the room by themselves reported that there was smoke in the room to the experimenters. If there was a group of 3 or more, only 10% of people reported smoke in the room. In 1970, a study found that 62% of participants helped alone when they were by themselves, versus only 31% of people would help if they were with another person in a situation where a person was having an apparent epileptic seizure. In a 1969 subway experiment, bystander intervention occurred in 62% of cases with a drunk model versus 81% of an ill person. So if they perceived the person as being drunk, they went, they're fine. If they saw them as being sick, then they were much more likely to help. That's obviously subjective interpretation, how we view the situation. In 2011, a meta-analysis of 105 studies, that means they looked at all these studies put together and then crunched the data, showed that the bystander effect reduces intervention by 20 to 30% with more bystanders. So with every other person, the likelihood anyone's going to intervene keeps dropping. In 1980, an experiment revealed 55% intervention rate when you're alone versus 28% intervention rate if groups of 4 or more in a lost child scenario. That scares me to death. In 1995, a study found 68% would help if they were by themselves, and only 22% of people if they were in crowds of 10. In 2006, a study showed 72% intervention if you're by yourself versus 15% if you're with 5 or more people. In 2012, a closed-circuit TV footage showed 85% of there would be interventions on 85% if a person was by themselves as opposed to if there were more people. So that's just observational study. If you're by yourself, 85% more likely to help. If there's anyone else with you, you're not likely to help. Less than 50%. We also evaluate other things too. I thought this was interesting. In 2005, the cost of helping was inversely correlated. If the bystanders perceive there's a low cost of helping, it's not going to cost me any money, it's not going to be an injury or too much time, 70% chance that they were going to help. If they felt the cost was going to be really high, only 20% chance. In 1987, there was a study on mood. If you're in a positive mood, 55% of people in a positive mood, self-reported positive mood, were going to help. If they were in a neutral mood, it goes down to 40%. So if you're going to meet an emergency, you better hope those people around you are happy. And then finally, in 2013, a study showed that 15% of people who were drinking alcohol, drunk bystanders, were going to actually help if they were drunk. But if you're sober, it goes up to 50% of people are going to help. I'm not saying drink or don't drink. I'm just saying. Just the facts. There were 2 other pieces of research that I chose just to talk a little bit more in depth. In 1997, there was a study that was done. It talked about the clarity of the emergency. If people who were bystanders understood clearly what was going on, as opposed to people going, what? I don't really know what's happening. Are they related? Is this a problem? Is this a domestic issue? Like they don't know what's going on. There's ambiguity there. 82 versus 35% are going to intervene. So clarity of the situation. Think about Mordecai. Think about David. Think about Jesus. First step was evaluating their surroundings, identifying that this is an emergency, and realizing something needs to happen. A more recent study, only about 7 years ago, found that phone distraction reduced intervention rate down to only 22%. If people were undistracted by being on their phone, it went up to nearly 70%. Now, I think that's a really cool sort of comparison or analogy to what we do in everyday lives. When we're here, we're in our own little world, and we forget to see what's going on around us. And I don't mean necessarily a situation of a car accident. I mean, if I'm here all the time, I'm not seeing even what's going on in my own house, with my kids, with my wife, who might need some help. It's important for us to realize that we have to get rid of that ambiguity. We need clarity. And the only way we can do that, if you take a look here, it says, but encourage one another daily as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Encourage each other every day. Jeff's like, you're done, Jeff. Encourage each other every day. This should be a daily thing. We should be involved daily. Praying at all times in the Spirit, with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert, with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints. That says we should be praying for everyone. We should be taking I don't know what's going on in your world, but I should be going, God, you know. I should be praying for that. All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. So if you see someone who needs help, maybe they need to be redirected. They need correction. They need admonishment. But you got to do it, like we said, tactfully, with empathy, gently, so that that servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. That person has a role too. And maybe it starts from us being clear about what we see, looking up from our distractions, noticing who is around us, having relationships, talking to them, and not just passing by and going, hey, how's it going? Good, man. All right, see ya. It's like Jim Carrey and Dumb and Dumber. Big gulp, huh? So this slide is a call to action for all of us, for me. And I realize it's not an easy call to action. And I'm definitely not pretending that I'm a model example of being externally focused. Unfortunately, I'm sure I miss lots of emergent situations, even in my own home. But maybe our first step is we start with asking God for those opportunities to present themselves so we can get messy. I want to thank you for your attention today. And I am prayerful that each of us is going to find a renewed sense of purpose in attending to others, lifting them up, seeking relationships, finding out how you can be of service to them. I feel that we're all called to do that. If you feel that you need support, you need prayers, or maybe you just realize, hey, maybe today is the day. I need to be buried in baptism. I need to follow Christ. We'd love to have you join the flock, if you will. Let's go ahead and stand and sing.